Now, the future of coalition governments is in question as the country heads towards the 2024 general elections. The ousting of the DA's Mpho Phalatse as mayor of Johannesburg and the failure of the ANC-led coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay are just some of the recent events that have cast doubt on whether the country could have successful coalition governments. Well, let's try and get a better understanding of where we stand as per these coalition governments. And we're joined now in studio by Daily Maverick's election analyst, Wayne Sussman. He's in studio, walking in ever so quietly. We're shifting deck tables here. Michael Beaumont was just on that chair. We were talking the very subject of coalitions. What's your assessment? Are these coalitions working? And if we look or gaze into the crystal ball into the future, are they going to work if things are collapsing?
I've literally stepped into the hot seat. It's great to be back with you. This is a very important time for coalitions across the board. Let's just remind the viewers that in the last now 3 weeks, we've seen 1/4, 2 out of our 8 metros change hands. We saw that the ANC and its alliance partners lost control of Nelson Mandela Bay. Now you have not 5, not 6, but a 10-party coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay, led by the DA. And then on the flip side, in the city of Johannesburg, we've seen the ANC take over, where they were able to get the Patriotic Alliance across to their side. Those are the key votes. And you've also seen the city of Johannesburg fall. What politicians have to bear in mind is that it's all fair and well to be motivated by position, to be motivated by short-term aspiration. But if residents and voters do not see difference between now and actually the national and provincial elections and now and the next local government elections, they'll continue to turn away and turn off politics. Remember, I only remind you that the 2019 national elections was our worst ever turnout since 1994.
Sure.
And the last local government elections was the worst ever turnout in any national, provincial, or local government elections. So politicians have to do better to connect with voters, and part of what we're seeing, particularly in many urban areas, and let's call them secondary cities, places like Mogale City, which is on the West Rand, places like Metsimaholo in the Free State by Sasolburg, is that more and more of these places are now under coalition government. And residents have to see that those coalitions are not just working for their short-term benefit, but making decisions which will ultimately benefit the residents today and certainly in the future.
Michael Beaumont made the point where you were seated that political maturity has to start coming through, especially in these coalition agreements. And that's why they held this meeting on Wednesday to discuss the stability of coalition governments. Do you think that other parties should be doing the same, if not already making agreements or at least making protocols about how these things ought to be handled? Because as things are going, we're going to go back to your element about voters losing faith in the democratic system.
Correct. So one of the things which I think, from a legislative point of view, I think we do need a framework where coalition agreements get made public. So if you're in Johannesburg, that's not just residents of Johannesburg. Anyone in Gauteng should be able to see the new coalition agreement which Dada Morero and the ANC have formed with its coalition partners, to understand that. And secondly, we need a mechanism that if you feel disgruntled or feel disjointed from the direction of the current coalition, that there's a framework to mediate and try solve some of those differences. Because we do not want a repeat of what we saw in Nelson Mandela Bay between 2016 and 2021, where one single councillor out of 120 single-handedly brought down that metro, I think it was up until between 4 and 5 times.
Yeah.
And that is very, very scary. What we need is maturity. We need people to make difficult decisions. Coalitions are going to be tough, and they ultimately have to work, because we're seeing that after the local government elections in November, more and more South Africans are living under coalition governments.
If I go back to that very question of political maturity. Again, I make reference to Michael Beaumont, who says the Democratic Alliance cannot say publicly that, no, we don't talk to the EFF, but quietly, behind closed doors, they talk to the EFF and they try to make certain arrangements with them. Is that a demonstration of political maturity, or is that the very recipe that leads these coalition governments to be in the mess that they are in?
Correct. So let's just deal with what Michael Beaumont just said and also what we heard John Steenhuisen say, and we'll come back to the EFF.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I agree 100% with Michael Beaumont that I think it was very important an Action SA did this week. They said, let's take stock of what happened. What happened in Johannesburg should not have happened, and we need to do what we can. Action SA needs to do what it can to keep the other metros and other places, in those two metros, Ekurhuleni and Tshwane, in the hands of the current coalition government. On the other hand, the DA's, its version of political maturity is saying that, look, there's a coalition agreement. You can't just chop and change a coalition agreement every 6 months, because otherwise you'll give away your hand and your whole arm will get taken. So there are different ways of showing political maturity, but what's currently happening shows that all sides who are involved in coalition agreements need to learn about what's happening. And then with regards to the EFF, I mean, I'm amazed at the tolerance of EFF. We know usually Julius Malema is a man who has a low tolerance threshold, but he has stood by DA insult after DA insult. And that is why I agree with Michael Beaumont that if you look at the numbers, Ekurhuleni could be gone any minute, as I just said in my article, that Julius Malema giveth, Julius Malema can taketh away in Ekurhuleni. And that's why, and I would say that on the one hand, I understand that you might isolate certain DA voters by saying you'll never speak to the EFF. But imagine that Tanya Campbell can turn Ekurhuleni around with her coalition partners. That could be a game changer for the DA. And they need the EFF on board for that.
Well, you would want to hope that they are listening. Let's conclude the conversation. And it goes back. It circles back to that point about voters losing faith in the democratic system. I can't remember who it was, but there was a seminar recently where this point was raised very sharply. You've mentioned 2019, worst turnout, 2011, 2021, November, the recent local government elections, probably the worst by any standards. What is the danger if that trend continues where voters are losing faith and they're saying, what do you vote for when these things don't benefit us?
So just one nugget of hope. I always like to give nuggets of hope. We have seen turnout in recent by-elections be higher than the relative turnout in those wards in the local government elections. So there's a sign that voters are returning to the polls, which gives us hope. The flip side to my nugget of hope is that if people don't see that they can affect change to the ballot box, are we going to see more service delivery protests? Are we going to see more libraries get burnt down? Are we going to see parts of South Africa, and sorry to be so negative after a nugget of hope, descend into possible anarchy? Because if you cannot see that your vote will bring about positive change, services, possible better employment opportunities, the alternative is too ghastly to contemplate.
Well, yeah, and hopefully the politicians are listening here. Daily Maverick election analyst Wayne Sussman, thank you very much.